I'd like to introduce myself. I am a partner with Luthra Luthra Law Offices. We, across sectors, advise a lot of franchisees and a lot of global retailers in their retail and franchise business. Before I take you through to my presentation, I'd like to walk you through where we as lawyers and participants in the industry see value in the franchise business. As you all know, the Indian retail market is estimated to be USD 500 billion. That's the potential of the market. And the Indian market is considered to be one of the top 5 retail markets in the world. I'd like to take this opportunity to share some of the key aspects required by companies like a lot of who are present here to understand how could you leverage your business and take it to the next level. The first and foremost aspect that you guys need to keep in mind is that you have to understand the true potential of the business and the market. When I talk about the true potential of the business and the market, I'm not talking about only the consumer trends, which is more like a consumer diligence of what the consumer trends are, but also to understand what are the true growth prospects of the market for the next 10 to 15-year horizon. In a lot of instances, it's important for entrepreneurs to also understand if there are any bottlenecks in the sector. For example, a lot of instances, your business plan may say, I'm going to have 50 stores in the next 5 years, but have you really looked at the real estate asset in India and seen whether you can really open the store milestones that you have envisaged? In addition to that, it's also important to understand the regulatory market. Now, I don't know how many of you are franchisors or are franchisees, but those of you who are looking at entering into a new market in India or any kind of foreign jurisdiction, it's very important to understand what the regulatory scheme looks like. There could be regulatory restrictions in the law that don't allow you to go solo. You may have to have a JV partner or another franchise partner. There may be caps on the amount of money you can take out, etc. So it's important to understand the tax and the legal setup before you actually foray into a new jurisdiction. In addition to the 2 points that I addressed earlier, it's important to undertake a commercial due diligence of the market. A few years ago, we were advising one of the biggest real estate players in India. I can't take names for obvious reasons. And they were trying to tie up with one of the world's largest hypermarket players. The negotiation went on for 1.5 years. We were very close to signing when we realized that somebody in India, another very big player, had gone to that country and taken inspiration from the brand. And by the time we were all locked up in a room and negotiating the contract, this completely unrelated guy had started stores which exactly the same format, in fact the same brand name. And that became such a big challenge to the deal that we were advising on, that the deal ultimately didn't go through. So it's important to understand the market in terms of who your competitors are and what their business plan or strategic plan as well is. The next few key items which entrepreneurs need to keep in mind is also understand what your business plan is like. Your business plan has to be both a forward-looking and a strategic business plan. And you have to identify your partners, your goals, synergies, ethics, and long-term strategy. Now, when I talk about synergies, it's easy for a franchisor to tie up with a financial player, but I don't know how much real synergy that adds on the table. But if a real estate player, say, ties up with a hypermarket player, that's where the true synergy is. So it's important for everybody to understand what market they're dealing with and who are the players who can really add and bring value on the table. Now, when you look at increasing your business and going to the next level, and as you call it, leveraging your status quo, you have to understand and take a key decision whether you will want to continue with a pure franchise in which the risk and the liability really sticks with the franchisee, or would you like to really have a joint venture with the franchise partner? So you can have a pure franchise relationship, which means a relationship without any equity investment from the franchisor. You have 49% FDI on the automatic route in single brand retail. Of course, there are conditions that need to be met. But in addition, you are also allowed to have 100% FDI in single brand retail subject to a sourcing norm, which I'm sure everybody is very keen to know what it means. When we talk about key issues in growth and expansion, I think some of the key issues that franchisors or franchisees, depending on which side of the table you are, is funding. Now, funding can be basically divided into 4 aspects. One is access to domestic markets, and we all know that access to domestic markets will come with a specific bank interest rate and probably some kind of securitization for your asset as well. There could be external commercial borrowings, but in this sector, external commercial borrowings are very restricted. There are several nuances and eligibility criteria that need to be satisfied. So a lot of times, while that avenue is there, it's not really a practical avenue for either the franchisor or the franchisee. There could be instances where a franchisee negotiates a contract where you actually get the franchisor to do a staggered buyout of the share capital of the franchisee. In that way, what happens is you can look at the business for the first few years, which is your gestation period, see how it goes. If there's really money in the game for each party, you can take it ahead and convert it into a joint venture. And lastly, you always have private equity funding. A lot of times, I get questions from small and medium enterprises, and also a lot of promoters, and I understand a lot of people in this room would be the promoter category, who ask me why private equity funding, because they're nervous they're going to give away their control, they won't have full flexibility in how they want to run the business. So there are basically 5 reasons why we as lawyers see that there is a substantial value add in tying up with a private equity investor. One is that definitely it's a viable route for funding. Second is, for a small promoter-run MSME, you may not have the best global practices in your business. So tying up with a private equity really helps you take your business to the next level. You will have access to sophisticated business, trained expert methodologies. The private equity guys, they work across sectors, so they can give you, real input from how the sector works. They also help you clean up the business. So, typically there will be a financial due diligence and a legal due diligence. Any kind of legal non-compliances can be cleaned up, which are really value depleters in the long run. So what you can really do is that if you get a private equity player, in addition to getting the money on the table, you also end up creating a lot of value in your business, because the business is more efficient, it's marked up to global best practices, it's cleaned up, there are no corporate governance or legal issues. And what you can do in the next 5 to 10 to 15 year horizon, it's actually like window dressing for your business. You can take it towards an IPO or look for a bigger private equity investor. So really, I think it's important for entrepreneurs of the SME side to start thinking where they want to take their business, not just in the next 5 years, but perhaps in the next 25 years of the run. I'd like to address a few of the key issues that come up in growth and expansion, and which typically reflect in the kind of franchise agreement that you would have with your counterparty. The first would be, it's important to define the true essence of the scope of the alliance. A lot of times, parties don't really understand the business, and they somehow do not define the scope of the alliance very well. For example, for a global five-star chain like Hilton, service department may be part of their business plan, and they may want to route it through the franchise entity. And for the Indian player, they may not want to do service departments. They may say, that's not the kind of area I want to dabble with. So there are a lot of nuances, and you have to understand what the business is. For example, in apparel retail, and because we advise a lot of global retailers, typically the e-commerce business, which is bookings through the internet, are sitting in a different vertical. Now, typically as an Indian franchisee, you'll probably expect all of that business to form part of your JV, but that may not be what the foreign guy is thinking about. So it's important for both the franchisor and the franchisee to understand why they're tying up and what exactly are they going to do. And not just look at the next 3-year gestation period, but look at 10 years, look at 15 years. Because what we keep telling our clients is that when you come to us, you've only thought about 5 years, and end of 5 years, suddenly, you think you want to take the business to the next level, but there's no funding, or you've never talked about it with your counterparty. So if you're thinking of 5 years, think of 15 years. Have a back of the envelope calculation of what you want to do for the next 20 years, and then make your game plan or your business plan accordingly. Similarly, for allocations of responsibilities and degree of control, typically if you are tying up with a global franchisor or you're tying up with a private equity guy for money, you will have to vest some degree of control in that guy. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's important to understand that in a franchise or a joint venture, whatever the form of the relationship may be, it's important for parties to clearly know what they respectively bring on the table, what the milestones for performance of both obligations are, and how that has to be kept absolutely sacrosanct for the running of the business. In addition to allocation of responsibilities and degree of control, it's important to flesh out the duration and milestones for the contract. Now, to give you to give you a few examples, now typically parties say, we'll do a 5-year franchise and we'll do 20 store openings. And then they don't think about what's going to happen. Are you going to renew if things are going to go well? Have you ever thought about that? Because typically if both parties have invested so much in the same business, why would you want to partner with a different player? But your franchise agreement may not allow you to do that. So you have to, when you are negotiating your contract, think of the next few years of what you want to do. Now, even things like milestones. So there are times we get a term sheet and the milestone is, 20 store openings, 5 openings every year. So we try and tell them that, knowing how the global markets are, you may not really have a 5 store opening every year. So why don't you have a creative solution where in 5 years you open 50 stores, yes, but you have a rollover for 2 years. So if 1 year you don't do as well, you don't open the 5 you were supposed to open, you can open 6 the next year, or do an average of numbers. So, you don't let one particularly bad year where the industry is not well really take a hit on your business in India. And the last point on this slide is probably investment outlay and funding commitments. It's very important to chart out, again, I keep going back to the business plan because that really is the Bible on how you run your franchise. So you have to look at your potential, should have done your market study, you have to look at how much revenue your business ought to be generating, and where will you be getting the funding from. And as we discussed in the previous slide, there are typically certain defined avenues for funding, but it's important to understand a lot of hidden costs, etc., which also come in a franchise model. Typically for the franchisee, and I don't know how many of you here are franchisors. Can I get a sense how many of you are franchisors and how many of you would be franchisees? Probably just a few of you. But there are a lot of hidden, costs in the contract, like advertising fee. The global brand suddenly wants to change the yellow of the McDonald's and make it pink. And, so they want to do a brand refurbishment. They want to have minimum sales commitments and things like that. And that hit, or that financial hit, is typically moved to the franchisee. So it's important for both parties to understand how much they both have to invest and draft out the contract accordingly. One of the key issues where we see a lot of dispute between franchises and franchisees would be a non-compete. Now, typically, I trust we all understand what a non-compete is, but there has to be some kind of a balance between the commercial flexibility that you would want to retain versus the commitment towards the business. Now, the sense that as lawyers we tell our clients is that you can't have a ballpark non-compete, that if you're doing apparel, I can't do apparel with any other brand. So typically, there are few creative solutions that we put on the table. Either you have a negative list. So if I am a global retailer like Fendi and I don't want to tie up, and my global competitor is Prada, I can say you can tie up with anybody else, but do not touch these 3 people because they are my absolute competitors, and there is no way you can be working with both of us. So that's one way of having a narrow non-compete without restricting yourself completely. In addition, you can have a product non-compete. For example, if you're tying up with somebody who only does apparel, there is no reason to tie yourself up with a non-compete on accessories. So try and understand your business and devise a non-compete which really protects the essence of the business that you're tying up with and gives you the flexibility in dabbling with anything else which is not really core business. You could devise your non-compete around activities. Now, for example, if there is a 5-star hotel player and you're tying up with him, he may not be interested in service apartments. So instead of putting a non-compete saying, I cannot do any kind of hotel business, we would draft it differently and say, we won't do 3 to 5-star hotels because that's your core business, but I am free to do, small service apartments, etc., which don't compete with your global business. Even otherwise, for example, duration or geographical non-competes. If I have a store in Gurgaon, which is a big, apparel store or a multi-brand store, I would want to have a non-compete, say 10 kilometers from that store. So there's no point, restricting me from doing business in Jammu and Kashmir if my store is really in Karnataka, where what you have to see is that you have to derive value from where the business is sitting. So have an area of protection 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers in where your store is, so there is no direct, deflection of footfall that's happening. And that's how you can retain commercial flexibility and at the same time honor what you have to do with your joint venture or franchise partner. Now, again, a few things which you can look at is right of first refusal for new businesses. Because the theme of this conference is how you can leverage yourself to go to the next level. If you have a good relationship going and end of the gestation period, there is profit in the game, and both parties are pretty much comfortable with how they have aligned their affairs, how they have ordained their affairs, how they're running the business. Maybe you can have a right of first refusal mechanism in your contract, which says that we are only tying up for X, Y, and Z, but tomorrow if you do A, B, C business, I will be your preferred partner in India. So it could be vice versa. If some of you are franchisors and you're looking at, setting up franchisees in Africa or some other jurisdiction, maybe a right of first refusal is a good way to ensure that you can pump a completely different business through the same franchisee or the same joint venture partner with whom you have already built a lot of comfort. The last two aspects that I'd like to talk about before I hand over to my co-panelist is termination and exit and IPR protection. Now, when we come to termination typically becomes a big area, and we've had a few earlier panelists talking about how what needs to be done once termination happens is not been addressed. Now, typically there would be 3 or 4 grounds why you would want to terminate the contract. Either there has been a material breach by your counterparty, they're just not doing what they're supposed to do, or there is some kind of a force majeure, which is like an act of God, or there could be instances where, certain thresholds of performance or milestones have not been met, and either of the parties sees no sense to continue. But I think what's important for each one of us in this room is to understand that a running business which has value on the table is perhaps much better than not having a business. So you have to look at consolidating that value and not terminating for any reason whatsoever. Now, for example, typically, and we see that in hotel franchises, where the franchise is not just for one hotel, it's for 50 hotels. And every hotel is sitting in a different SPV, which you call a special purpose vehicle. Or you will have a master franchise agreement and then specific smaller agreements where the specific brand is given out. Now, you have to look at what are your key ticket items. If those are breached, you should terminate everything. But there could be some instances which are not so big, which are only store specific or hotel specific. And if they are breached, maybe what you can do is terminate vis-a-vis that one hotel. So don't blow up a 50 hotel relationship because there has been a small breach in one hotel. So if there is a material big ticket breach because of which you can't continue, like your IP has been compromised, please go ahead and terminate the whole thing. But where there are smaller breaches which can be handled at the local level, maybe there has to be a bifurcation which allows you to terminate only the arrangement vis-a-vis that hotel. You hive it off, you sell it off, you do what you have to do, but not let it reflect your entire relationship with the party. Also, once you're terminating, it's important. Typically, when it's a breach or something, then tempers are high, and if you haven't discussed valuation, etc., it goes into a dispute. So parties should aim at looking at termination in a very practical way. If you have to terminate, you have to terminate, but try and not let it go into some kind of litigation or arbitration, because knowing how things are, that's just going to, stall your business and your counterparty's business for 5 years. There's really no value add. So the way to address that is typically when you are entering into your joint venture or franchise agreement, you need to clearly think about what will happen when termination happens. What is the valuation and who is going to take the business? Typically, it's a foreign franchisor who doesn't have presence in India. You will probably get to keep the store, but he'll strip out the brand. So what are you going to do with the store? Is this going to be, some stalls, etc., which you can't make use of? So can you look at selling the entire infrastructure to a third party minus the brand? But those things have to be thought of on day one, so as to mitigate any kind of exponential monetary loss on the date of termination. And also things like, return of confidential information of either parties, non-solicit for employees, because you don't want your employees to go and join the other party and vice versa. And even, stopping usage of brand, etc., because that can really lead to penalties or certain kind of enforcement issues. And lastly, I think another key aspect that each entrepreneur in this room needs to know of is you have to get your IP protected. No matter how small your business is or how big your business is or which territory you're working in, it's absolutely critical that you have IP protection in terms of patents or trademarks, whatever you're doing, and ensure that nobody else can tomorrow dilute the core business because he has a similar brand and your brand is not registered. So even if you're starting small, a lot of it starts because you put a value around a brand, and that's how you multiply the business. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and if there's anything else, any questions, you can always feel free to shoot them.